Hey, Next Levelers, Bob Gibbons. Looking forward to another episode of the Next Level Show here on 1190. We're excited today. We got Tim Kachuriak, and Tim has a very unusually named company, and it is Next After.
Right. Well, so what comes after the next level is next after, right?
Okay. We'll get into that a little more. It's not immediately obvious to me, but a lot of things are not. Just ask my wife. So Next After is the name of the company. They've been around for quite a few years, about 10 years. They have 3 offices: Vancouver, British Columbia, Jacksonville Beach, Florida. Not just Jacksonville, but Jacksonville Beach. That's not a big place. And Plano, Texas is the HQ. You can find them online at nextafter.com. And Tim, really appreciate you being with us today.
Super glad to be here, Bob. It's great.
Well, so let's start off with just what is Next After?
Well, the best way to describe it is Next After is 2 things. So we are a fundraising research lab and a consultancy that works with nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
And inside our fundraising research lab, we really focus on doing 2 types of research. The first type is what I refer to as forensic research. So we'll go and we'll analyze very large amounts of data across multiple different nonprofit organizations, across multiple different nonprofit industry verticals. We're looking for where are the patterns and opportunities to really grow revenue. And the funny thing that we have run into is that, the kind of data we're most interested in analyzing is not easily accessible, so we oftentimes have to create it. And we do that by becoming donors ourselves to these nonprofits.
Okay.
So we do these mystery donor studies. So I'm sure you're familiar with mystery shopper type of things. So very similar concept. We'll go out and we'll subscribe to hundreds of different nonprofit organizations' stuff. We'll monitor everything they send us. We'll analyze it. We'll score it. In many cases, we'll give mystery gifts as small as $20 and then as large as $5,000. And then we monitor how those organizations change their communication with us. And it's absolutely fascinating.
So you'll send $20 to, pick a charity. Are these mainly going to be large national charities that you're doing it? You're not sending it to the local food bank?
Yeah, oftentimes we have a lot of large organizations that are in our studies, but sometimes we do run some experiments and some research with very small organizations to see what the variance is. And what's interesting is you could take 2 organizations that are very, very similar in terms of size and scope and really even what their focus area is. And what we'll find is that they have 2 radically different practices for how they actually communicate with their constituency, their donors.
Right.
And we always ask the question, well, gosh, which one's right? If organization A is sending a certain number of communication pieces and organization B is sending a completely different set of communication pieces, which one works best? So we take the results of what we do in this forensic research and we then actually go test it. And that's the other part of research we do where we actually use the web as a laboratory to run rigorous scientific experiments to find out who's right. And it's awesome. So
that would be fascinating.
It is fun stuff.
So, it's funny you say this because my wife and I have a few charities that we try to really make a difference in instead of trying to, instead of sending $50 to 50 charities, we spend a lot more on a few.
Right.
And other than our church, we really focus on 3. And they're all local to the DFW area. And, one focuses on special needs people. One focuses on battered women, women in need, crisis. And the third one is trying to prevent women that are being sex trafficked, trying to rehabilitate them and help them. So that's kind of the things that we do. But what's interesting is when we give money to them, the way those 3 respond is extremely different.
Correct.
And one of them in particular will make a phone call and say, thank you so much for the donation, regardless of size.
Right.
And in fact, the last time I got that call, it was from the executive director.
Wow.
Which is a guy I know, but I was still like, why are you calling me?
It makes a lasting impression, doesn't it?
Right? Oh, it was a huge impression. I said, so apparently we gave you enough this time.
Right.
He goes, oh no, we're doing this to everybody.
That's amazing.
And this was after National, North Texas Giving Day.
Yeah.
So they're calling everybody. I said, even somebody that gave you $20? He said, yeah. It may take a while, but we're going to call every single person.
So what's interesting, what you just explained is something that we've been able to validate in our research. So most people will give to a certain number of organizations, right? And they'll focus their giving on, the charities that speak most closely to their heart, right? But occasionally you'll see something and it'll inspire you or pique your interest, and you'll give a one-time gift to that organization.
Right.
And what's interesting is if that organization can actually really validate that action you took by giving a gift and make you feel really special, they may earn a spot in your top 3, right?
Yes.
So that's why we try to analyze these things. We say, look, if we really want to help these nonprofits do a better job of keeping and inspiring donors, they got to get better about their practices, right?
Exactly. So your testing, I assume you're doing sort of A/B testing, or in your case, maybe A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Yes.
So you're doing a lot of different ways. So are you doing that even with the same nonprofits? You might have a nonprofit that you give multiple gifts to of varying sizes from varying people or whatever, and then seeing how they respond?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we do these mystery donor studies, we get to see how all these different organizations respond. And then we have about 23 clients that we work with on a consultancy side.
Okay.
And we go to them, we say, hey, look, we found all these different ways that we might be able to inspire more people to give. Let's test these 2 ways in your communication program. And so we'll run a rigorous scientific experiment of those 2 practices. We'll monitor all the data. We'll make sure that it's statistically valid. And then we'll be able to prove which practice works best. And then we document the results of those experiments. We publish them in an online research library. And then we're now taking a lot of that content and turning it into training programs and resources and ebooks and tools. And we have podcasts talking about this stuff. So we're trying to say, how do we actually liberate the learnings from these experiments?
And what's interesting about your research is in our pre-interview information, you told me that you give away all that. I mean, you basically publish your research in a totally publicly available way. So any competitor that you might have can get the same information.
Precisely.
And you do that because what?
Well,
you're
there's
spending
2
a lot of
reasons.
time and money.
Yeah, but there's a very practical business reason why we do it.
Okay.
And that is the best way to be able to attract people that are your ideal customer is by giving something of value away, right?
Yeah.
So on a very pragmatic level, I mean, we are actually building a very large inbound marketing machine with this content that we're publishing. But on the other side, we've figured out along the way that we actually are a cause-based organization ourselves. Now, we may not be a nonprofit organization, but we're very much a cause-based organization. We've realized that our cause is to ultimately unleash the most generous generation in the history of the world, which sounds like a very big, audacious vision, which means it's probably just about perfect.
We
right?
call that a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal.
Exactly. And so we say, well, how can we contribute to that vision of really unleashing generosity? And the way that we can do that is by using our fundraising research lab to decode what works and then getting it out to as many people that are doing, generosity work as possible, right? So that's why we give it away.
Interesting. But given the research you're doing it's pretty big scale. So is it only applicable to giant companies that have big budgets, or not companies, but nonprofits, or can this still be replicated on a small local basis as well?
Yeah, so that's actually exactly what we're trying to work on. So inside of our consultancy, we can only work with very large organizations that have very large volumes of donors and email files and web traffic so that we can statistically validate the results of those experiments. But the learnings we actually uncover can apply to any nonprofit organization. So really what we're trying to do is take what we're learning with the big guys and make it accessible to the smaller organizations. And that's what our training programs are really focused on.
Yeah, and I was interested last night. I was reading through the pre-interview materials, and I went to your website, and I thought it was interesting that, at the top you have your menu.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is research.
Right.
And I thought that was interesting because it's very telling that you really want this stuff to be viewed, to be used, because that's the first thing. That's people are going to click however they click, but the very first thing they see is going to be that research tab. And so I clicked on that and read a few things, and it's basically a case study.
Mm-hmm.
This was the issue. This is what we did. This is how we did it. And you also showed how many responses you got,
right,
stated whether or not that was statistically significant,
mm-hmm,
et cetera, and then drew conclusions from that. So give us an example of one of the things that you've done and what the results were.
I'll share with you my very first experiment. So this was probably 6 or 7 years ago, actually 8 years ago. I was working with the George W. Bush Presidential Center here in Dallas. We had not yet broken ground, so they were building the $300 million Presidential Library and Center. And I worked for a separate company at the time, and they hired us to do all the online fundraising for that capital campaign.
Wow.
Which was really cool. I mean, I got to pitch the former president of the United States. He was sitting where you're sitting, and I was like, told him not to underestimate the power of the internets and all that stuff, and it was great. But we were doing what anybody would do if they're trying to acquire new donors. So we're doing Facebook advertising, we're doing search engine marketing, and we're doing email list rental. And we had an email that was going out to about 200,000 people. And I had just been exposed to like this new methodology of how we could really use the web as a laboratory and test different things. So I said, let's run an A/B test. And because I'm not really sure if this is going to work or not, I want to just change one little variable. So we changed one sentence in the email, and it was the very last sentence. The original version read like this: please accept this invitation to stand with President Mrs. Bush by making a tax-deductible online contribution now. I mean, it sounds like a typical ask that any nonprofit organization would make, right?
Yeah.
The change was we changed that line to read, please accept this invitation to become a charter member of the George Bush Presidential Center. Right? Now, in order to become a charter member, you have to give a tax-deductible gift. But by focusing on the value that the recipient receives for their gift,
what am I going to become?
We increased click-through rate by 121% and giving by 74% from that one experiment. So then I was like, I'm hooked. I want to spend the rest of my day.
And that's just changing one sentence.
One tiny sentence, exactly.
Interesting. And I know some of the things that I read last night was changing just the structure of the email. You know, do you have headers in the email for the different sections or not?
Right.
Things like that, and you document how that changed everything. That's fascinating. Well, we're going to have to take a quick break. We will be right back after these messages. We are back. We're talking to Tim Kachuriak with Next After. You can find out more about them at nextafter.com. And we were talking about the research that the organization is doing. So for our listeners, please go to nextafter.com, click on research, and you can read all of their research findings over, the last how many years?
1,300 documented online experiments, and I think there's like 7 or 8 major studies published.
That's amazing. So do you, and all of these are studies that you've done that have real results. I mean, this is not just some theoretical thing. This is really something that's done. And so are a lot of those applicable to any organization, for-profit, nonprofit, or are they really only specific to nonprofit?
No, I think they have wide applicability, and here's why. Because what we're really trying to decode is human behavior, right? We're not necessarily trying to figure out why do people give. We're trying to understand why do people say yes, right? You think about that. If we can actually understand how people actually make decisions, then we can actually engineer better decisions into our sales funnels or into our donor funnels or into any other type of funnel we might use in our marketing. So I think it has a wide applicability for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, because I guess human behavior is human behavior. And every transaction has somebody giving over something of value and receiving something of value. Even if it's making a donation, they're still getting something of value, which is I get to be that charter member. I get to feel good about having helped some population that's disadvantaged, whatever.
Yes. And that actually, that kind of points to like the overarching thing that we found through all of our testing, that there's one thing that really, really, really moves the needle, no matter what kind of organization you are, whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit, and that is your value proposition. How do you articulate your value proposition? For me in the nonprofit space, my value proposition is answered with a single question, which is, if I'm the ideal donor, why should I give to you, your organization, rather than some other organization or not at all? I mean, that's the choice that people have. And when I meet with nonprofits for the first time, I'll ask them that question, and I'm stunned, like how these chief development officers of very large, $100 million nonprofit organizations can't answer that simple question.
That's funny because I was introduced to a nonprofit in development, one that was just being created before it really actually was created. And they were still in the business planning stages. And the 3 people that started it all had a need that they shared collectively in their families, but they were all pretty upper middle class to what I would call, wealthy. And so we met, and after they pitched me their idea, and I was there to help them with the real estate piece of it because my business is in real estate. They wanted to, they basically said, we want somebody to give us a building or give us a building to use for free. And I was like, well, yeah, that would be nice. We all want that, don't we?
Sure.
And in the end, I said, I'm going to say something that you're not going to like very much. You are all upper middle class to wealthy people. You drive nicer cars than I have. You live in more expensive houses than I live in. Why should I give you a dime?
Right.
And initially,
Excellent
they were
question.
pretty uptight about that. They didn't like that question at all. And I said, you need to know that, be able to answer that question, because ultimately, if you're out trying to get donors, if they're not saying it, they're thinking it.
That's correct.
And they gave me a really good answer, which of course was the three of them were not the profile of the typical family that needed this service. And anyway, I helped them out, and we did not get anybody to give them a building. I said, the only people who are going to give a building is somebody that already has a huge buy-in to your mission.
That's right.
And you don't even exist yet, so nobody's going to have that. And since then, they've grown and grown, and it's an amazing story. But still, it's incredible that you got to have that mission, and you got to have an answer to that question.
And here's the tricky part, okay? Inside the organization, so I'm on the inside. It's actually really, really difficult for me to know what my value proposition is, right? Because a value proposition cannot be declared, it has to be discovered. Because it doesn't matter what we've agreed it to be inside of the boardroom of our nonprofit organization. What matters is what lives inside the mind of their ideal donor. And that's why experimentation is so incredibly valuable, is that we can run all these different experiments, testing different value propositions, and let the data be able to validate which one is right and which one is wrong.
Now, wait a minute. So that's a hard thing. What you just said, I don't disagree with it. I'm just saying that's a little bit difficult, because if somebody has a nonprofit and they have a stated mission, which comes first? I mean, you got to have a mission, but your value proposition may be different in the minds of the donor.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile those?
The value proposition is not the mission statement.
Oh, okay.
The value proposition is the answer to that why question. Why should I give to you? And it's not just because you have this mission. I mean, that's great. I mean, I can say, hey, that's a neat mission, but still help me understand why I should give my money to you rather than someone else, or not at all, right? Those are my choices as a donor.
Okay.
So it's not just about the mission, it's about the reasons why. And there's emotional reasons why, there's logical reasons why, and we have to be able to make a value proposition argument to our donor or to our customer, right? If you're on the for-profit side. What is the argument as to why I should go and work with you rather than somebody else in the commercial real estate?
Okay, so let me put that down then. So in my space, I represent only the user of office buildings and warehouses. I don't represent landlords. I don't represent people that have retail or restaurants or anything else.
Right. So can I just pause
ahead.
you right there? The first word that you said is actually one of the most powerful words you can use in a value proposition. You used
Represent.
an only statement, right?
Okay.
What that represents is exclusivity, right?
Yes.
So every value proposition has to have four key components. Appeal, which means I like it, I want it. Exclusivity means I can't get it anywhere else. You're the only one that can provide that. Credibility, I believe in your value proposition. I believe in you to be able to deliver the service or the product that you're promising to me. And then finally, clarity, I understand it. The absolute bedrock of any value proposition is clarity. If people don't understand, they can't believe, and then they can't actually want it, and ultimately they won't buy from you. So it's amazing just how in that simple thing, you really understand your own value proposition.
Well, I understand my value and what value I can bring, but that doesn't mean that the customer believes that. So, for example, I have a lot of competitors, of course, and some of my competitors are the largest companies in the world for commercial real estate. Well, those companies have a huge conflict of interest problem because they don't use the only statement. They do everything and everything for everybody. So they have tons of conflicts of interest. Well, I can talk about how I don't have any conflicts of interest because I do have the only statement. Right. Yes, I used to work for landlords for 20 years. I used to be the guy that signed the leases on behalf of the landlords for 20 years, but now I use all that experience exclusively for the user. But if that customer still thinks that there's something about working with a small boutique that's somehow not as good as working with the big companies because they get big, prettier pictures and better graphs and whatever, they may still use them.
Right. But that's not your customer. That's not your ideal customer. So every value proposition must consider trade-offs, right? I'm not trying to market to everybody. I'm trying to market to my ideal customer or my ideal donor.
Okay.
And I have to be willing to say, if these people don't get what we actually are and what separates us and makes us different from our competitors, and I can articulate that very clearly, they're not our customer. Goodbye.
And that again, that's interesting to me because I have defined my customer to be an owner-managed company, not a company that's publicly traded, not a company that has a lot of bureaucracy or a lot of layers, I should say, not bureaucracy, but a lot of layers where the decision is no longer made by the owner, it's now made by somebody in middle management,
Right.
or even upper management, but somebody who's not an owner. Those people have one primary responsibility or one primary thing they want to achieve, which is keep my job.
Yeah.
Don't ever make the wrong decision. It's kind of like in the 80s, the story was nobody ever got fired for buying IBM.
Right.
So that's not the kind of customer I'm going after because it's not a good bet.
It's the wrong motivation set, right?
Yes.
So like everybody comes into any sort of sales cycle with a certain ingoing motivation set. And the ones that you're just talking about, like those manager people, they are afraid. Like that is their biggest motivator is fear. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to make a bad decision and then actually have that come back and actually hurt me personally. Right?
Yeah, but somebody that owns the company doesn't have that fear.
Totally different motivation set. Right?
Yeah. All right, so back to the value proposition. It has to have appeal, exclusivity, credibility, and clarity. That's awesome. Thank you for that. I like that. So ideal client. You've already stated that yours is typically going to be a very large nonprofit. How large do they need to be?
Well, if you look at the nonprofit industry, there's about 3.5% of all nonprofits that have annual revenues of $10 million and up, right? So it's a very kind of like top-heavy type of industry. And there's a very small segment of organizations that are, large, like they're, larger than the rest. And so that's typically where we focus all of our attention and efforts is really looking at that top 3.5% of organizations with $10 million and up in revenue. Generally speaking, at that size, they have some type of level of direct response marketing program at work. They have probably a sizable donor base that is in existence. They probably have sizable web traffic and email files. So as a general rule, we focus on those areas. Have we worked with organizations that are smaller than that and been successful? Yes. But they have to have something else that's very unique. So we've worked with actually locally here an organization that was sub $3 million a year. But what was really interesting about them is they would get 250,000 visits to their website every single month, right?
Wow.
So they had considerable volumes of traffic. So they had all these people that were kind of, interested in what they were doing. They just couldn't figure out how to actually convert those people to be financial supporters for their organization. And that's where we were able to optimize.
So you took that on even though it wasn't your ideal because what?
Well, because they had the inputs, right? So either if you don't have, the volume of donors that we can, run statistically significant experiments with, we can do that with your traffic, right?
Okay.
And so the problem is not like, how do I actually keep more of my donors, which is what larger organizations are worried about. It's how can I get new donors for a small organization.
So the dollar volume of their donors wasn't that great, but their traffic was great. Therefore, that was the trade-off for you is you traded off, dollars for eyeballs, and we're still willing to work with them.
Have you had a successful career selling to businesses? Maybe tired of having your income limited by arbitrary compensation plans that penalize you for selling more? If so, you should consider tenant representation, a specialty within commercial real estate. At Riata Commercial Realty, Inc., we represent companies and nonprofits that occupy office buildings and warehouses. There is no limit on income, and the more you produce, the higher percentage you keep. If selling houses at night and on weekends sounds good to you, don't call us. But if you want to work business hours, have unlimited income, and leverage the relationships you already have, we want to talk to you. Please visit us at texastenantrep.com. That's Texas, Texas, tenant, Tenant, rep.com.
Talking to Tim Kachuriak at Next After. Check him out at nextafter.com. So, Tim, how does somebody get into this business? How did you do that?
Not on purpose. So it's actually kind of a funny but very true sentiment is that like most people that work in the nonprofit sector did not really plan to work there when they started their career. And so my pathway into this was very indirect. So I graduated college right after 9/11. Horrible time to enter into the job, space, especially for somebody who desperately wanted to work in the field of marketing and advertising. But fortunately enough, I worked at a country club all during high school and college. So I had like 432 uncles that were all captains of industry, right? And the guy who was the president of the country club was also the president of the second largest ad agency in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And so I went, set a meeting with him and did my little dog and pony show. And he's like, I'd love to hire you. And then he started to wring his hands and look down. He's like, but, we just laid off 30 people yesterday.
Oh,
9/11 has hit our industry hard. It hit our agency harder. I'm sorry, I can't help you. So for 6 months, just getting doors slapped in my face, I couldn't get a job out of college. I met then a serial entrepreneur named John Vento, and it was at a charity boat golf outing. So I was on his team. It was like some scramble or something. And this guy was like on the phone the whole time. He'd like half the time just kind of like walk up and like, whack at a putt. Like he was just doing business. I was like, this guy's super cool. And, we kind of got to know each other a little bit. And he's like, I got a couple of projects maybe you can help me with. And so I did a couple of projects for some of his different little startups. He said, why don't you start your own business? I said, well, I don't know how to do that. And he's like, well, I do. He's like, we've got an incubator on the second floor of our office building. I'll give you a desk. I'll introduce you to people. I'll be your partner. And the rest is up to you, kid. And I was like, sweet. I had nothing to lose at that point. I'm living with mom and dad in the basement, right? Like,
So
no
he
job.
offered this and you didn't even have a business plan or even what kind of business you were going to be in?
No, not at all, which was great because I had no expectations, right? I mean, this is actually kind of one of the great opportunities, just kind of go into this thing out of pure necessity.
So he was betting on you as a person, regardless of what the industry.
Yeah,
might
and I
end
did
up
a couple
being.
projects, so he got to see the quality of work
Yeah.
that I could produce. But he's like, I don't have a job for you, but I've got a better idea. Why don't you go start something? So I did that for first 5 years out of college. I ran my own business, and we moved out of the incubator and had our own office, and I had staff and all that stuff. And I learned everything it requires to be able to run a successful business. You got to go get customers. You got to serve them well. You got to, make sure that your staff stays engaged and gets the stuff done and like make payroll and pay bill. I mean, like all that fun stuff that like you can't really learn in a classroom environment. So it was like coming out of college and then going right into my PhD in business.
Yeah.
And I loved it, and I learned so much, and I love what we were doing. We ended up becoming like a little digital marketing boutique to the general market ad agencies in Pittsburgh, which was great. Only problem with that was that we were kind of like bonded to whatever clients they had, right? So the one agency worked with a lot of legal clientele, so we made a lot of lawyer websites, and another one had like all these different automotive groups, so we made car dealership websites. Now, nothing wrong with those two things, but it didn't really kind of spin my wheels.
I'm glad to hear there's nothing wrong with it because last week's guest was a legal marketing firm.
Oh yeah, they're great. No, I mean it's great work, and there's like lots of opportunity for sure. But I just wasn't really excited. I was kind of felt like I was going through the motions a little bit. And right around that time, my church was doing a capital campaign, so they're trying to raise money to build a building, and I was like, well, I'll do all the marketing materials for your capital campaign. And it was the very first time that I got to do, something I felt like I was wired to do, which is, marketing communications, but for a cause I cared about.
Yeah.
I was like, this is pretty sweet. And so then it's hard to go back and make, car websites after that, right? So I ended up kind of going through this little crisis of career kind of moment and just saying, I think I want to move on from this business. And right around that time, a good friend of mine, actually somebody I think who was on your program, Brian Fisher.
Oh yeah.
He lived in Pittsburgh as well, and we went to the same church. And he he was selling his financial. He was a financial advisor, selling his practice, and then moving to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to work for a nonprofit faith-based organization. I said, "Well, that's pretty rad. That's a radical move, And so I called him up. I'm like, hey, Brian, what's going on down there? He's like, dude, you need to come down and check it out. He's like, I just hired like this guy who's my new VP of Ops. He's a legit rocket scientist, went to MIT, used to work for DirecTV, like sending satellites into space. And like now he's here and, we're going to do some cool stuff with technology. And so I was like, all right, cool. So I left Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, There's like 6 inches of snow on the ground. I got to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's 81 degrees. I had my interview at this place called the Aruba Beach Cafe, which is literally right on the sand on A1A Avenue.
Oh, my.
Sliding glass doors are all open. The waves are crashing on the thing. Like the sea breeze is blowing through my hair. And the guy's like, bling, 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 playing the little thing. And I don't remember a word from that conversation, but I remember going back home. I said, honey, I think we're moving to Fort Lauderdale.
And you're going to have to build websites for lawyers and car dealers.
Yeah, right. So that was how I got into the nonprofit space. So we went back and we sold our business, sold our house. We moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Fort Lauderdale, Florida to go work for this nonprofit faith-based organization called Coral Ridge Ministries. The day we got there, the founder of that organization, who had been there for 35 years, had a heart attack.
Oh, no.
He was in the hospital for 9 months and then he passed away. So we went from being about a $36 million a year organization to about a $12 million organization in about 18 months. And it was a really, really difficult time for the organization.
And you're the last guy in.
I'm the last guy in, but I'm kind of wired to like the guy who was second command. So my buddy Brian was hired to be the EVP, and then he got promoted to the president role when our president was incapacitated. So I was part of kind of like the team of like, we're going to go figure out how to do this ministry 2.0 stuff. But like I was hired to do digital communications, and they said, whatever you're doing online, figure out how it makes money because, we're just hemorrhaging. So that was my first violent shove into the world of fundraising was through that experience.
And now Brian is in Dallas. Did you chase him here as well?
So the funny story, like I've only worked for 2 companies, and I've been hired by the same guy. So Brian Fisher hired me at Coral Ridge, and then he hired me. He actually moved to Dallas to work for a direct response agency that works with nonprofits. So that was how I kind of got into my current business. Brian's like, hey, why don't you come to Dallas? There's not much hope here in Fort Lauderdale anymore. So I followed him again.
At least it was somewhere generally warm,
Yeah.
warmer, not quite Fort Lauderdale. But
Right.
So anyway, for our listeners, you can go check out at thenextlevelShow.com, Brian Fisher. Look up Brian Fisher. He's with Human Coalition. So how did you got to Dallas because of Brian? Mm-hmm. So how did that lead into Next After though?
So the company that I worked for was a company. It was basically an advertising agency for nonprofits. So they were a direct response agency. They did direct mail, and they had been doing direct mail for 30 years. And they said, look, we have a lot of pressure from our clients to kind of go deeper into this new, brave digital fundraising world. We don't know how to do it. Why don't you come and start up that division at our agency? And I said, great. Sounds awesome. So moved to Dallas. I forgot to tell you that every time I've moved, my wife has been 8 months pregnant. I have 4 children.
You moved a lot.
3 of them were born in completely different states, and we moved when my wife was 8 months pregnant. So it's amazing that I'm still actually alive. First,
no
and
kidding.
Married second. But anyway, we get to Dallas, and the first 6 months were actually pretty rocky. They had hired a bunch of executives at the same time. We're all stepping all over each other, trying to make sense of how to make this stuff work. And I didn't know fundraising, right? I knew digital marketing. I didn't know fundraising. So I started by doing some research, and what I found out is that in the nonprofit digital fundraising world, the benchmark conversion rate, so out of 100 visitors that come to a website, how many people do you think would give a gift to a nonprofit?
4.
Okay, so it was about 2. So 2% donation conversion rate was the nonprofit industry benchmark. Email, which is supposedly the most effective form of digital fundraising.
Really?
Yes. 0.15% response rate.
That does not surprise me.
Right. So what that means is that we have a 98 to 99.5% failure rate in our fundraising funnel. And I was like, well, that sucks. If I'm going to spend the rest of my life working in this space, I need to figure out how to do better than failing almost all the time. And that's what kind of led me on this quest to try to figure out how to do conversion rate optimization for nonprofits. This was something that was really, still a pioneering science in the for-profit space at the time. And I was like, well, why is nobody talking about it in the nonprofit space? So really, what led to really what became the genesis of Next After was simply like taking something from one industry, applying it to another one.
Yeah. And so let's go back to the name real quick. So what was the reason for the name?
I wish it was like a really neat story. So I went out into like the desert and I sat there and crossed my legs and
saw a burning bush and he said, it's called Next After.
Yeah, it wasn't anything quite like that. So I was looking for a name that had a .com domain name that was available.
Yes.
I wanted something that was easy to spell and was common words that anybody would know. So next after was available. I said, that sounds good. And I don't know what I'm going to do next after this. So there comes next after.
So it doesn't necessarily tie to the actual business.
Well, it does now, of course, right? So like the story today is that like next after is not, it doesn't matter what happens today. What matters is what's next after, right?
After
like
you hire me.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
That's
And
so
it does make
funny.
sense now because like a lot of our work is forward looking and we're trying to say, look, I don't care what I know today. I really care about what I can actually learn like, tomorrow. So that's why we give away a lot of our research. It actually puts positive pressure on our staff to continue to innovate and get better, right? Because you think about that. If you give your very best thing away today, then everybody has it, right? So there's no advantage. And that puts positive pressure on me to continue to innovate and get better.
But are you seeing that other people are in fact using your research results?
Absolutely.
Really? So you see
Yes.
evidence of that?
Every single other agency or competitor to our organization is following our work, right? Like we keep track of all that stuff, and it's amazing, and it's fine. Actually, some of them have even become industry allies and partners and said, "Hey, will you come and help us figure out how to do this stuff at our organization?" So, like one principle that any business can use is like, do not be afraid of giving away what you think is your most significant, unique value, right? Because I don't see how being generous can ever like kind of come and bite you in the butt,
Well, and if you're going to demonstrate your knowledge and how smart you are and the application of that to real world issues that your clients are going to have, how is that a bad thing? So you demonstrate it, you lead with value, then they're going to need you. Because most people aren't going to say, yeah, I'll just do that myself. They're going to say, you do it. You're the expert. So, all right, we're going to take one more break. Be right back. All right, we are back with Tim Kachuriak at Next After, and check him out at nextafter.com. So, Tim, what would you say is your biggest challenge or frustration within running Next After?
Well, I think it's changed over time, but today for me, like the biggest challenge is the fact that I have to continue to reinvent my role. When you are an entrepreneur and you go start a business, in the beginning, you do everything, right? So like you go get the customers, you oftentimes are the one that does the work. You're oftentimes the one that then has to handle all the administration and the bookkeeping and all the fun stuff that goes with running a business. But as the business grows, if you continue to do all those things, then it can't grow, right? So I've had to like let go of things, and some things are easier to let go than others. Like I didn't really like client service that much, so that was an easy thing to let go. The technical execution, I could do it, wasn't the best at it, so that was another easy thing to let go. But now it's like sales and marketing, I'm having to let go and let other people that I hire come in and take ownership of those areas, and that's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do. And I think that like if you can't let go of things, then I think that you hear the term like serial entrepreneur. People like they'll start a business and they'll grow it to a certain point, and then they'll go and have to start another business because their sweet spot is just in that startup phase.
Yeah.
So I'm really trying to kind of like learn how to be a better manager and facilitator and cheerleader for my staff that's taken over and doing frankly a way better job than I've ever done.
Well, now you have 3 offices in Plano, Texas, Jacksonville Beach, Florida, and what was it?
Vancouver. Yeah,
Vancouver. Okay. So how do you manage that? Do you have all the sort of same functions in all those locations, or are the 2 on the coast more just salespeople?
Yeah. So our head of like research and education is in Jacksonville office. So I make trips there probably about once a quarter to kind of work with him on what are our specific research priorities. All of our online training and everything is actually filmed. We have a little studio down there that we film a lot of that stuff. In Vancouver, it's more of a sales office. So, I'll make a couple trips out there a year. Primarily that's focused on the Canadian market, which is kind of an emerging opportunity for us.
Okay.
But one of the things recently, it's a very tactical thing that we've invested in that's been making a pretty significant difference, is we bought Facebook portals for all of our offices. So I don't know if you've seen those.
I was going to say, what does that mean? Oh, it's the portal, that
little
device.
Little device thing, the little screen thing.
Okay.
And it is really cool. I mean, like all the commercials, like how they show how it kind of the camera follows you and it's like really
freaky,
vivid picture and it feels like you're in the room. It's totally true. So I know I'm not supposed to be like plugging products, but like Facebook Portal was really pretty
Sorry,
sweet.
maybe they'll send me a check.
Yeah, maybe.
Not.
Hopefully. But that's made a real significant difference because,
So
like, when you have people in different locations, like, it's important to see them on a regular basis and have, like, as close as you can to real meetings.
So do you have it just, where is it in the office? I mean, or do you move it around
We've
within
got
the
them in the
office?
conference rooms, and then I have one in my office too. So when I'm meeting with like some of the remote staff, I can just flip it on, like, hey, Portal, call Brady, and it'll call him. And
So it's not always on. It's not like that head is always there.
yeah, you can turn it off, and it has a little cover. You can cover it up too. So everyone's like, I know, afraid of all these listening devices. Like, we have all these bugs basically in our office today, but I'm not.
Interesting. Everybody I've seen that, or I've talked to that have seen that commercial are like, I don't know, that's a little freaky. That's a little Big Brother. I don't know that I want that in my house.
Right.
But the business application is brilliant. I like that a lot. You guys lead with content marketing because you're publishing all your information. You're sharing all your knowledge base. You also do that in another way that a lot of people don't, which is a podcast. So tell us about the podcast.
Well, this is actually a new thing that we launched just the last quarter of last year. It's called the Generosity Freak Show. And what this is basically it's a 360-degree conversation around giving and generosity. So we'll interview people that are donors, very wealthy, like philanthropists. We'll interview people that work in nonprofit organizations. We'll interview people that do something else in and around the generosity business. And it's fascinating just to kind of get different people's perspectives on, what are the biggest challenges and what are the greatest opportunities. It's interesting to see the delta between how donors think and, think about charity and how actually the nonprofit organizations think. So it's been a fascinating journey.
Interesting. And how many episodes are you into now?
Oh, we're about 32, 33 episodes.
Okay. So that's pretty good amount of work.
Yeah.
Is it an hour, half hour?
It's generally between 30 and 45 minutes.
And what's where does somebody find it?
They can find it anywhere where they find their podcasts. So,
Just put in Generosity Freak Show.
Generosity Freak Show, yeah.
How did you come up with that name?
Well,
I love it.
So we host a conference every year. It's called the Nonprofit Innovation and Optimization Summit, and it was a conference that we started about 4 years ago. And this next year's theme is going to be all around the circus, kind of like the Greatest Showman theme. We're gonna have circus performers. We try to really get the pageantry back into conferences. And so I guess around the time we were planning that for next year, we're also birthing this podcast, and we're just well, it's the Freak Show. It's kind of like the sideshow. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So this is a conference that you've created out of your company. It's not like it's an industry trade association or something.
That's correct.
That's a big responsibility and amount of work.
Yeah.
How does that pay off?
Well, initially it's a significant money loser. So the cost to pull off a conference at the scale of the conference we pull off is very, very, very expensive. And it's very different than any nonprofit conference you go to. So I go to tons of nonprofit conferences, and frankly, they're lousy. I mean, they're in these dingy hotel ballrooms where you never see the light of day. People are still wearing suits and ties. It's it's just weird. The speakers are generally always the same people, and there's nothing new or exciting about them. So we're well, we go to a lot of these for-profit marketing conferences, and they're awesome. They're super fun. They have incredibly talented, bleeding edge marketers coming to speak. We said, why don't we do that in the nonprofit space? So I guess everything I do, I just kind of copy what everybody's doing in the for-profit space. So we bring in 18 speakers over 2 days, and these are people that come from all around the world. So last year we had somebody from Sweden and from Denmark and from Norway. I mean, we have people that come Estonia. We have people that come from all over that are talking about something that's really interesting that could help our nonprofit community. And we pay them very handsomely. I mean, it's not easy to get good speakers to come to conferences. But it's such a difference from what everything else that exists out there that people have just really been raving about it, and it's turned into one of our greatest source of new clients.
So is it a conference where everybody gets to come for free, or do they pay to come and you make money on it? Ultimately?
No, they pay to come. So the tickets are I think the most expensive ticket is $9.95. So it's not it's
not
not
outrageous.
It's not, yeah, but it's also not an insignificant investment, especially if you're talking about nonprofits. And we have sponsors that help support it as well, but it's still a very, very costly endeavor.
How many years have you been doing it?
This will be our 4th year. Yeah.
Where do you do it?
The first 2 years it was in Fort Worth, and we had like the River Ranch kind of down in the Stockyards, which is a cool area, and we had our party at Billy Bob's and mechanical bull riding. So like we had people that came in from, I think it was the first year they were coming in from the Netherlands, and they were like, "This is like the coolest thing ever."
Oh, yeah.
It's like the true cowboy experience. Last year we were in San Antonio, and we were at the Aztec Theater, which is a really cool venue.
Yes.
It's kind of more of like a rock concert venue.
Okay.
So it was pretty neat. And next year it's going to be in Denver, and it's at the Ellie Calkins Opera House, which is like this incredible venue. So
Awesome.
yeah.
So in your business, give me an example of a risk or a business risk, scary business risk that failed, something you tried and it just, it didn't work.
Yeah. Well, we have this research lab, so we're constantly testing new things. And one of the things that emerged is that a lot of nonprofit organizations don't know how to read web analytic data. They all have it. They all collect it because everybody uses Google Analytics or some tool that collects that data. Mm-hmm. But it's like, how do you get the insights out of that data and get it into the hands of people that can then make business decisions, marketing decisions with that data? So we saw the opportunity to create a software tool that did that. And I set up a separate company, and I went and actually raised some money, and we had investors, and we built the software, and we could never finish the product, and we ran out of money. And that was a big kind of like learning for me that that's a completely different business. And what I was trying to do was actually trying to be two different businesses at the same time. And it didn't work, right? So, I mean, perhaps if I would have hired somebody who was going to be 100% focused on this product, but it was like one of those projects that like at the end, I just couldn't even think about it. I'd lay awake at night just, trying to figure out how to like square the circle and just never could make it work because I don't know that business. Right?
How long did it take you to realize that and just pull the plug?
Well, fortunately, we ran out of money in about 9 months. So, it was, at that point, we were just kind of like, forget it. It's not worth trying to raise more money.
How about something that seemed scary at the time, but really was a success?
Well, the conference, the NEO Summit, is a perfect example of that. To do that kind of, event at that magnitude. We had 500 people last year. This year we're expecting like close to 800, 900 people.
How many did you have the first year?
200.
And you said that when you lost money,
Mm-hmm.
you lost money on the conference, but did you have enough business that came later on as a direct result that then made it profitable?
That's what's really cool. So what we find is that a lot of the people that go to that conference end up becoming our best potential customers in the future, right? So we've been able to convert a lot of people that go to that conference to being paid customers.
Are you the speaker every year?
I'm a speaker. So that's something that, I get to go out and kind of like get people excited about the event and,
So you're the ringleader. You're the ringmaster from the beginning.
Yeah.
You got to hype the crowd.
That's right. Yeah. Tell them how to get the most out of the conference.
That's funny. Mm-hmm. That's cool though. That's really awesome. It's a daunting task to do something that big, but that's really, really awesome.
What's really cool though, and this was like an unintentional benefit that we get out of the conference, is that it's really put our company on the map. It helps people really understand the DNA of
Nobody
our
else is
corporate
doing
culture,
it.
right? And so we're kind of like the cool, innovative kids, and that's really what we want people to think.
Yeah,
right? We're like the new kid on the block.
Well, Tim, thanks so much for being the guest today. I've really enjoyed it. We've learned so much. Listeners, please go to nextafter.com. Don't ask how the name came around. And if you want to know more about the show, go to thenextlevelshow.com or find us on podcast or YouTube at The Next Level Show. Type in the word "the" as well. See you next week with another great guest.